Welcome to the Bonhoeffer Project podcast. My name is Dan Leitz. I am joined by my illustrious co-host, Stephen L.A. Kimbrell.
Illustrious.
Illustrious.
That's a new word for you.
I know I didn't make it up.
Do you get a word a day on your phone? Is that what this is?
It's my word a day app.
I knew a guy like that
Today.
that literally got a word a day, and he
And
likes
just
to
put
use
it in a sentence.
He tried to use it, and nobody understood what it meant. But yeah,
But he did.
he did,
And he just held it over
really
you
good about
in,
that.
in a full snobbery
Yes,
type of, anyway,
illustrious.
illustrious. Yes.
Okay.
Google it. It's a $5 word. Put it in your back pocket. Use it when you need.
There you go.
Today we are talking about, I would say, 5 of the most, or I would say, impactful books that
Yeah.
we've read on disciple making, discipleship over the years. Now, for me, just to be clear, the disciple making, discipleship bug, I got bit by about 4 years ago. So mine don't go back that far. I don't have a whole repertoire of books that I've just been reading. Now I have dissected a bunch recently, so we're going to talk about those. Now I believe we would some of ours are going to overlap because we've
Right.
I don't think there's one that I haven't read that you've read.
Yeah.
But now I'm going to have to read it, and there's one
Yeah.
that I've read that you haven't read that you're going to have
Exactly.
to read it. So
Yeah.
this is a fun list, and we're going to just talk about it. So the first one that I want to say was probably, I would say I read it every year because one of the things, and again, I'm not going to give away too much, but in the Bonhoeffer Project, one of our main focus is the gospel, going up to the headwaters of
Right.
Scripture, going back to the gospel, because the gospel you proclaim determines the disciples you're going to produce.
Right.
So if your gospel's wrong,
Yeah.
the product's wrong.
Right. Exactly.
So you've got to know what you're putting in because what you put in is what you get out.
Mm-hmm.
So the book, The Discipleship Gospel, like I said, it's a book that I've read probably 3 times. I've taken my whole staff through this.
Yeah.
The reason I would say this is such a phenomenal book is, and a read it again book,
Yeah.
is it's a constant barometer check,
Mm-hmm.
gut check. Like, are you preaching the right gospel?
Yeah.
It is so easy. And I'll just say this. For those of you listening, I want you to know from a guy who preaches weekly, there is such a gravitational force to preach the American gospel.
Yeah.
There is such a just a gravitational pull to, and it's not purposeful. It's not like you're trying to water down the
Right.
gospel,
Right.
but you hear it in so many circles and in so many contexts that
Yeah.
you just, man, Jesus wants you to go to heaven and just be forgiven. Who doesn't want that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, who does not want that? That is an easy message to preach.
Yeah.
But this holds you accountable.
It does, and I think most of our listeners know what we're talking about
Sure.
when we were talking about the gospel. But if you're new, and I think sometimes people kind of wig out and think, but
Like it's a different gospel.
right,
Yeah.
like we're saying, well, Jesus didn't actually die.
Sure.
Jesus
No.
didn't actually rise from the grave, or you can be saved another way.
No.
That's not
No.
what we're talking about. But like what you're saying in a watered down American gospel is just highlighting some of the benefits
Yeah.
of the
Yeah,
gospel,
the benefit. Yeah, gospel benefits.
right?
Absolutely.
Like, just every single week, forgiveness, 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 forgiveness.
Right.
And it's like, the book doesn't change the gospel
It
proper.
doesn't diminish it at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
I feel like it strengthens it,
Oh,
right?
for sure. And it doesn't diminish the benefits either.
Right.
It's fortifying.
Yeah.
It's like building a better foundation. It's like pouring more concrete around reinforced
Yeah.
rebar. It's like,
Yeah.
because I would say I've gone back to look at some of the history of the gospel in America. And I mean, I think it was in the 50s, maybe 60s, in the height of kind of the crusade movements, Billy Graham, things like that. They were really distilling the gospel down, like what are the key components that people need to get to heaven? And that was the goal.
Yeah,
we need to get to heaven.
Let's get them in.
Let's get them into heaven. And so you're saved around this premise
Yeah.
of forgiven to go to heaven.
Right.
Do you believe that? Again, I don't know who wouldn't. I don't know very many people who wouldn't be like, hey, are you a sinner? Uh-huh. Do you want to be forgiven? That sounds great. Would you like to go to heaven as a result? Amen.
Yeah.
But the gospel that Jesus preached was a little more nuanced,
Yeah.
a little tougher.
Right.
Like, hey, who wants to die?
Yeah.
Who wants to follow?
Yeah.
wants to give up their own life for my sake.
Yeah.
Like, that's a different call.
You know, and that takes me back to several years ago when I started wrestling with these things, and I'm just like, man, I've just never seen Jesus go up to people and beg them like, hey, would you go to heaven if you died today? Like, I didn't see that conversation with him or the apostles.
No.
I didn't see him say like, hey, come on, just repeat this prayer
Right.
after me. And I understand, there's situations
Sure.
and contexts to do that, but it just had a different approach. And so I love the discipleship gospel too.
Yeah.
For me, it's even changed how I communicate on a Sunday to when I'm communicating and I'm talking specifically about salvation. You know, I'm reminding people, hey, look, this is a call to repent, to believe, and to follow.
That's right.
And man, I feel like it clarifies it for people.
Absolutely.
And it reinforces it with our people who are already claiming to be followers of
Right,
Jesus.
because they repeat what we say.
Exactly.
And so we've got to make sure that we're saying it. And this book,
good book.
The
Bill Hull.
Discipleship, yeah, Bill
Vince
Hull, Ben
Sobels.
Sobels,
Great
phenomenal job writing this book.
Okay.
Stephen, what you got?
Yeah. So good job, Teacher's Pet. We
Yeah.
have to give kudos to Bill.
I'm going
right?
to send this
points.
podcast to Bill. Absolutely.
He's going to be excited. So for me, I'm going to say it goes back to probably the first book I read on this subject, on disciple making, and I kind of read it by accident.
Okay.
The title got me. It's called The Master Plan of Evangelism.
Yep.
And if you've been around the discipleship world at all, it's kind of the gold standard.
That's it.
Right? Robert Coleman wrote it years ago. I read it because I was interested in evangelism.
Same.
Right? Like,
So, yeah.
and he tricked
That's
me.
why I picked it up. He tricked me too.
He tricked all of us.
Yeah, he tricked us.
And
Absolutely. He
but it's a short, simple book, but it blew my mind because when I got into it, I realized what he was saying, that the master plan of evangelism is effective disciple making.
Yeah. Did you not, like, middle of that book, just be like, wait a minute?
Right.
Like, you literally in that book, you're like, wait a second.
Like he switched it.
Oh, for sure.
But he gave me something better.
It was a bait and switch, but
Yeah.
the switch was like,
Worth it.
whoa.
Like, when does that ever happen? Like,
No.
somebody does a bait and switch and they give you something better.
something worse?
It's
Yeah, usually it's something worse.
terrible.
Yeah, you're like, why? Why'd you do that?
But
Yeah, I think I had that heavy sigh moment where
Yeah.
you're just reading it, you're like, ooh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was Jesus' plan was not like, and if you did Evangelism Explosion, and we all did it years ago, like, fantastic. Like, I'm all for it. It's equip people to evangelize. But Jesus didn't just start with like, hey guys, I got evangelism classes. He invested in people. He made disciples. He walked with them. He drove it deep in them to where they were fully formed disciples, and then he commissioned them. And those guys that he had spent years with, then they took his message and they carried it and they multiplied it to others. And this crazy multiplication happened. Evangelism happened.
That's right.
Because that's what disciples do. And so I think for me, just walking through those simple 8 chapters were phenomenal. In fact, we just finished a couple months ago. We went through the whole book with our staff at church, and I think it was just incredibly the same thing. Like they thought, wait, I thought we were getting into evangelism,
right?
And it was a good swap for them too.
Well, and I think too, one of the things, it's a tendency, I would say, for a lot of pastors, church planters, is to produce in the inception of a church the effects of disciple making, right? Every church, when you look at, hey, first guy I got to hire, I want a missions guy, I want an outreach guy, I want an evangelism guy, whatever. Those are all offices, if you will, of someone who's been discipled.
Right.
And so it's an effect. Evangelism is a byproduct of effective discipleship.
Right. Yeah.
Outreach, reaching the community, missions, reaching the world.
Right.
All of those are legitimate byproducts of effective discipleship.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what the book is like. It just, hey, you want to know how to effectively disciple or evangelize? Disciple people. And you're like, I mean, it is. Like, wait, what? because again, I think it's that word and the lack of intentionality in the modern church, where discipleship is coming to church. Discipleship is listen to a sermon.
Right. Go to a class and learn more about the book of Revelation.
Right. Information.
And that's just, and I think that's where sometimes we've talked about how some people feel like, well, I don't want to be a discipleship church because that's competing with evangelism and we're all about saving and reaching people. I'm like, yeah.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I want to be that too.
Yeah.
And we want to disciple all of our people into doing that and how to do that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
It's a great book. Pick it up.
If you've missed it along the way, go back and read it.
You got to go back.
It's great.
I got to talk to Robert Coleman, I think it was in December. No, it was October of last year. And just, I mean, he's still going. He's still fiery. He'll give a fiery prayer and he's like this old grandfatherly figure. Guaranteed he's got jelly beans in his pocket. He's just one of those guys, just the sweetest individual. But like he really was a catalyst for the modern disciple-making movements. And phenomenal book. Don't want to miss it.
Awesome.
All right, my second book that I want to talk about, it's called Making Disciples Across Cultures, by Charles Davis. Now, this is an obscure one. And it's not like you can't get it on audiobook, because I know somebody's already looking at Audible and trying to download it. You can't. You actually have to read this one. You have to have a pen, a highlighter. So there's a couple of reasons why I love this book. The first one is he's an audio engineer. And prior to myself being lead pastor, that's what I went to school for, audio technologies. I was the tech director here at this church for a dozen years. And so he gives some examples of how we are to be making disciples cross-culturally. Now, his context, he speaks of in more of a missionary sense.
Right.
But what he describes, and this is just really cool, almost I think every chapter, he gives an example. Just think of your church, right? I think most churches have a mixing console, a soundboard in the back, and there's faders. Those are the sliders on the bottom that raise the volume up and down on whatever channel that you're talking about. Well, he basically goes through the book and talks about different areas of our spiritual walk where we may have the fader up on one side and not the other. Let me give you a practical example. I believe it's chapter 2 or 3. He talks about like our awareness of the spiritual things around us. In other cultures, they have more of an awareness of the supernatural. Whereas Americans have a lot of awareness of the natural. And so by inference, then, the American church is really stuck in a naturalistic, everything's explainable.
Right.
There's a cause and effect on everything. And so what he talks about is basically the supernatural side of that fader in the life of an American is super low. And so, I mean, he even talks about like prayer. Like when we pray as disciples, do we really believe we're bringing down strongholds? Like, do we really believe that we are doing damage against principalities and powers in the unseen world by our prayers? Like, do we have that faith anymore? And it really just opens you up to like, oh man, because again, we're a very practical society. Very see it, believe it. And it really, the subtitle, Missional Principles for a Diverse World. And I don't know where you're living. I don't know where everybody's living, but here in Southern California, it's melting pot. So multicultural, cross-cultural, I mean, it could be your neighbor. That's cross culture. They may be in the United States. They may be in Southern California, but they came from Cambodia. They came from Cameroon. They came from somewhere. So ministering across cultures is kind of the name of the game for all of us. So we've got to be open to it. And I think it just has a real eye-opening mindset to open the spiritual heart or reawaken it for many of us. Because, I mean, I obviously know when I was saved, dude, seeing things, scales falling off the eyes.
Right,
Seeing things how they ought to be.
Yeah.
But then you get good at church,
Mm-hmm.
you get good at this walk with Jesus,
Mm.
and things become a little too naturalistic.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, I think all of us need that reminder.
Absolutely.
Especially pastors, because I mean, we're supposed to be the ones that live in the spiritual world, right?
Right.
But sometimes as a pastor, you can get, I don't know, a little jaded,
Right.
a little burnt.
Well, I
and-
mean, even in our last podcast, we talked about how just the day-to-day admin stuff, dealing
Right,
with
yeah.
cares of people, like you can get so
yeah,
practical doing,
Right.
James,
Cause and
right?
effect,
Just
yeah.
doing and doing and doing that you
Yeah.
forget, like, dude, there's a whole spiritual side to all of this.
yeah.
And if you're not awakened to it, attuned to it,
Mm.
aware of it, it's, you're fighting crippled,
Yeah,
right?
that's good.
So it's a great book.
Good
Phenomenal book. Good
Disciple
read.
Making. Who's the author?
Making Disciples Across Cultures, Charles A. Davis.
Okay, there we go.
All right, what you got? What's your next one?
Okay, my next one is called Transforming Discipleship by Greg Ogden.
Okay, so this is the
And-
one I haven't read. Give it to me.
So yeah, Greg Ogden has been around for
Yeah,
a while.
love
too.
Greg.
Kind of a legend in the disciple making world, and I think this was the book I read after the Master Plan of Evangelism.
Okay.
So
So it's
kind
right
of
there, right after.
yeah.
So you got the bug bit.
Yeah, this was probably, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago.
Okay.
And so I read Coleman's, and then I'm like, man, I need to really get some more on this. So I jumped into Ogden's. And the thing that stands out in my mind the most about this book, I need to go back and reread it
Okay.
because I forget stuff. I don't know
Sure.
about you.
Yes. Yes.
But one of the things that stands out is he was really the first one that pointed out to me the importance of investing in a few.
Mm.
This concept that so Jesus, and he kind of framed it like this. So Jesus is thinking to himself, and whether Jesus thought to himself, I don't know. But how do we impact the world? How do I reach Dan Lights one day with the gospel? And our strategy would be, we need like this mass marketing campaign, get this message out there. And Jesus, instead of going big, goes small. Instead of going to the whole world, he goes to 12.
Yeah.
And I get it. He spoke to crowds and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But he spent like 90% of his time with a few. And he just drove this message really, really deep in a few, and trusting that these few were going to take it to the masses. And so he was one of the guys who really spoke about that kind of thing, and then started talking about the relational piece of it. And that's where I started having these aha moments of, wait a second, it's not just about Sunday. Wait a second, it's not, because I just thought discipleship was a class.
That's right.
And he's like, no, it's about a relationship where people are actually, you've got something you're studying together, but then it spills over beyond that. Like
Right.
you've really got a relationship with these people, and you're in tune with their life. And so I think that was probably the first book that taught me those principles. And again, it's kind of one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Sure. And how's that? I mean, is that how you do things in your church now? Like, I mean, it's just that relational portion. Like, has that affected how you do things these
No,
days?
not at all.
Not at all. Gotcha. You're like, yeah, it's a good book, but I'm just not like, how has it affected it? How's it changed it?
I think it's one of those things, like over time, God's just continued to build on that principle and grow on it.
Sure.
We haven't left that principle, but it's just continued to develop. And, that's why, we talk about in our church that disciple making is built on relationships.
Right.
We say it's built on relationships, fueled by intentionality, and lived out through creativity. It's kind of our mantra. And so it's the idea that, disciple making can happen in any context. It can happen in your small group. It can happen at work. It can happen in your family. But it's got to have those three components to it. And that base one is relationships.
Right.
In other words, we're trying to, you can't do this drive-by discipleship stuff.
Sure.
You can't throw a book at someone. You can't send them to a website. You can't say, let's, read this. It's relationship. That's the context where people change.
Right.
Is in relationship.
And what is the hardest thing for people to deal with today? Relationship.
Yeah.
Like when you look at like where people struggle the most,
Yeah.
it's in their relationships.
Oh.
So it's no doubt that the enemy has a heyday, and
Yeah.
people are adverse to disciple making because
Yeah.
they're not a fan of relationships. Because people are messy, man.
Exactly. And if you can't be in relationship, then you can't be discipled,
That's right.
and you can't disciple others. That's just
right.
the reality.
That's right. All right, last book. This is one that we agree on.
Yeah.
And I would say this is singly the greatest book that I've read.
Do we need a sound effect right now?
There
Like,
should be. Producer Luke will throw something in there as I hold this book up. Conversion and Discipleship. You can't have one without the other. Bill Hull. This is, I mean, this is, again, if the Robert Coleman book was the, bait and switch,
Yeah.
this one was the gut punch.
Mm.
I mean, it literally was the gut punch. The Robert Coleman's was like illuminating, like, dude,
Yeah.
yes, evangelism, discipleship, yes,
Mhm.
okay, it makes sense. This one was like, the church has messed this up.
Yeah.
Like, we've separated conversion and discipleship.
Yeah.
We've made them separate entities. We've made salvation key, discipleship a class.
Yeah.
We're not calling people to discipleship. We're calling them to salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this was like a 1-2, boom, boom, like gut punch, uppercut. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what was it like for you? First time you read this?
Man, I picked up the book not long after I moved to California.
Okay.
So move out here to plant a church. I've already got in my heart that I want it to be a disciple making church.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure out, at the time what that looked like.
Yeah.
And
Let me know when you figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Still figuring it out. And I found that book somehow, maybe with Google, I don't know.
Sure.
And I start reading it, and I remember it's one of those books I'm telling my wife all the time, like, this guy is saying some of the things I've thought and just don't know how to
He
articulate.
articulated it. Yeah.
And he's killing it. And this Bill Hull guy, I don't know who he is, but he's amazing. And
Yeah.
and so that was what was happening for me. And then I had a local pastor. This is how I met Bill. A local pastor said, "Hey, I got this guy named Bill Hull. He's coming to my church to speak. I don't know if you've ever heard of him." And I was just like,
Wait, the guy?
I'm reading his book and it's blowing my mind.
Yeah.
And so then that's when I got involved with the Bonhoeffer Project. I go to the
Yeah.
thing, meet Bill.
Yeah.
And I remember at that thing, he kind of unpacked some of the stuff in the book, specifically the Gospels.
Yeah.
And he was showing how that some of, what we mentioned earlier about the discipleship gospel, how that some of the gospels that our people believe, that's what's impacting them.
Right. Yeah.
And because they believe a discipleship that undercuts discipleship, or
Yeah.
believe a gospel that undercuts
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
discipleship. And that's why they're not willing to be discipled.
That's right.
And so some of those things, again, just those aha moments of,
Yeah.
wow, this is
Yeah.
so
And
good.
that was, I would say for me, when I saw the different gospels,
Yeah.
these false or incomplete gospels, I was just like, oh, like he nails these incomplete gospels. And it's like, it's almost like a veil
Mm-hmm.
falls off your eyes and like you see it, like, oh my gosh, like I've done that.
Yeah.
Or I know that church, or I used to go to that church,
Yeah.
where it's, whether it's activism, whether it's, consumer driven,
Right.
and then he begins to go in on the kingdom.
Mhm.
And it is just, it's eye-opening. It's refreshing, because I
Yeah.
would say Bill's one of those, voice crying in the wilderness
Yeah.
kind of, he's the John the Baptist guy that's just,
Yeah.
locus-
And he's been saying the same thing for like 40 years.
well, and that's the hard part, because like there's people just catching on,
yeah.
and he's looking around. He's like, where you guys been?
Yeah.
Because he's been saying this stuff for decades. Yeah. And it's like, I was talking to him a couple of weeks ago, and, he's excited where, discipleship is moved towards. And I'm blessed to be able to say, I'm friends with a guy that's moved the needle
Yeah.
a little bit on that. And that's, again, it is, because I would say this, I would say the gospel Americana, the American version of the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
is the direct opposite of this.
Mhm.
It's conversion and discipleship. They're two separate things.
Pick which one you
Yeah,
want.
which one
right?
do you want? And everyone's going to gravitate towards the easy one,
Yeah.
conversion, because as we talked about earlier, who doesn't want to get forgiven? Who doesn't want to go to heaven?
Mm-hmm.
But like, who wants to die?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to, give up everything? Who wants to love God more than their family?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And we've allowed that.
Yeah.
We've said as the church, it's okay. Like that's only for the really hardcore people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so you have the really hardcore
Yeah.
who everybody's like, man, that guy's crazy.
Yeah.
That guy's weird.
That guy obeys Jesus. Like
Yeah, he does everything the Bible says.
He gives a tithe.
Yeah, it's super
and
weird.
All that kind of weird
Yeah, he
stuff.
makes me feel bad.
Yeah.
like,
He
he
prays
should
about
probably-
decisions.
He should go somewhere else. Yeah, well, and it's off-putting
Yeah.
because the holiness, the righteousness, the spirit-filled life, the
Mhm.
obedience is, it calls you out.
Mhm.
I mean, when
Yeah.
you live next to someone who's like, there's a guy and I'll just say it, he's in my home fellowship, and
Mhm.
he is constantly sharing the gospel,
Mm.
everywhere we go. Doesn't matter. Like he'd be at the doctor, he could be
Yeah.
at the grocery store. And every time I'm with him, I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like, this guy's doing it. Now he's got a special gift for sure, but it's like,
yeah.
so when you're around people like that and you're not that,
Mm-hmm.
it calls you out. So, well, rather than get called out, maybe I'll just hang out with people that are just like me,
Right.
the
Exactly.
converted,
Yeah.
let's not spend too much time in that discipleship stuff. Like, can we just chill out?
Yeah. No, it's a great book. I think it's probably Bill's best.
For sure.
I'm not sure if he would agree with that or say that. I don't know. But I know it's life changing, and it's ministry changing. I love the part about changing the scorecard in the church and
Sure.
all those kind of things. It's a phenomenal book. So
Yeah.
I would just say if you haven't read Conversion and Discipleship yet,
Yeah. If you pick up one book that we said,
put it at the top of the list.
put it at the top. And again, not that we're going to sit here and rank these books, but
Right.
again, it is one of the books that I believe, without a doubt, every pastor should read.
Yeah. And I think I'll just say this too. I don't think Bill will mind me saying it. If you read it and you got questions about it or comments, I think you can still go to billhull.com
Yep, sure can.
and shoot him an email. And that blew me away when I shot Bill an email and Bill responded.
That's right.
And
Yep.
and that's the kind of guy
He's
he
going
is.
to get it. His inbox is going to go.
Yes.
Going to go nuts. And he's going to be like, what happened?
Bill@billhull.com.
I think so.
Should we give out his home address as well?
Next one, next podcast, we'll give
Okay.
that out and
Yeah.
see if we get more subscribers.
Okay.
But thank you guys for joining us again. This is just our top for right now, and maybe we'll get some more tops going on. We're enjoying doing this, but thank you all for joining us, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks for checking out the Bonhoeffer Project podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you found it beneficial, leave us a comment. Make sure you share it with a friend. If you want more information about the Bonhoeffer Project and how we can help you formulate your own disciple-making plan, check us out at thebonhoefferproject.com. As we always say, make disciples, let Jesus build the church.